Hey guys, and welcome back to Embracing Your Virtue. For those of you just joining, I'm your host, Samantha Jasmine. I'm really super excited about today's episode. Today, we're going to talk about embracing special education needs for your children. And I have with me three friends who are all in the same boat, and we're just going to chat about that today. So, welcome, ladies.
Thank you for having
Oh,
us.
thank you.
Thanks.
Great. So, why don't we start? I'm going to let you guys introduce yourselves. We'll start with the person to the right of me. So we'll start with Noelle. Noelle, if you can just introduce, tell us your name, what maybe what you do professionally, how many kids you have, and a little, just a little brief introduction about you.
Sure. Okay. So my name is Noelle Burton. I am a school social worker in Newark, New Jersey. I live in New Jersey, and I have five children. My husband and we have five children. My oldest is a boy who's 14. I have a 12-year-old son, which is the one that has special needs. I have a 7-year-old son, a 6-year-old son, and a 2-year-old daughter. So those are my babies.
Nice, nice. Thanks. Okay, next, Otillia.
Hi, my name is Otila Ford. Um, I work in the CPSC department in Mount Vernon City School District, which I recently started back in February, which is sort of a full circle moment for me because my daughter, who's 8, was a special needs that went through the Mount Vernon CPSC department to get her services, which is speech and OT at the time. She was 3 years old. She's now 8 and doing great.
Nice. Thank you. And last but not least, Janie.
Hi, my name is Janie Hackman. My husband and I have two boys. One, the oldest is 7, going to be 8. He has special needs. He's also been diagnosed with autism. And our second son, he is 5. So I was working in the New York City Department of Ed, just recently transitioned out of that role, out of that department, just to be with the kids during this time of full remote. So
Great, thanks. And for those of you joining who may not know me, I have three kids, ages 6, 4, and 2 years old. My son, who's 6, he currently receives speech therapy and also some additional support for attention difficulty. And then my 4-year-old daughter, Olivia, she receives speech therapy, occupational therapy, and she's also in an inclusive class setting in her pre-K. And Tori is running the show, my 2-year-old. Great. Well, thank you guys. I think you guys did a great job. You told us a little bit about your kids and yourselves. And I just put this together that not only do you guys have kids with special needs, but you all work in the school system. So this is going to be good. And I'm excited. Okay. If for anyone, you can feel free to jump in and just share, when did you first notice that maybe your child may have had special needs, and how were they like officially diagnosed?
Okay, so I'll start with that. So I mentioned that my 12-year-old son is our child that has special needs. So he actually has been diagnosed with being emotionally disturbed. Um, and so we noticed that in first of all in preschools,
Mhm.
he ran out of the building 3 times in the first 3 days of school. And
Wow.
so
Okay.
he had to actually be dismissed from the program. So we ended up homeschooling him just for that pre-K year.
Mhm.
When he entered kindergarten, he was in a charter school with his older brother, who was in second grade at the time. And my son had a very difficult time staying in the classroom. He did not
Mhm.
want to learn.
Mhm.
He was not interested in learning. He was always very angry. He would outburst a lot. He was verbally violent, verbally aggressive, I would say,
Mhm.
and sometimes would be physically violent, like hitting people and different things like that. So he started doing this really from the beginning of the school year. So being a social worker, I said to myself, something's wrong.
Mhm.
Something's definitely very wrong. And so I would rather get him evaluated now instead
Mhm.
of trying to wait it out and see. And I believe it was the best decision
Mhm.
because that December, which is the beginning of the school year, that December, I went ahead and wrote a letter requesting evaluation. and then he was evaluated. It took some time because we were actually still living in New York, but we were getting ready to transition to move to New Jersey.
Mm.
So he had been evaluated, and then in March of that school year, he had actually been given the diagnosis, the classification actually, of emotional disturbance. And so there was some learning challenge because he didn't really retain the information very much, but the emotional disturbance was actually the most prominent classification. So then after that, they actually didn't put his IEP into place until the following school year, because what happened was the charter school that he was in did not have the program to handle an emotional disturbance classification, which meant that he would have had to be transferred. But also because we were moving to New Jersey, no longer being New York City residents, we would not be able to access New York special education services. So it was an automatic transfer over to New Jersey anyway. So then once in New Jersey, he entered the first grade. He was a year behind because he had basically learned nothing in kindergarten, and then a he was placed into a special education self-contained classroom for students with emotional disturbance. The school district, their programming didn't even work for him properly. It was a whole situation. It almost became a legal issue. And then because of that, the district ended up having to transfer him to an out of district placement. So he actually is in the most restrictive placement outside of a residential setting because the district did not have the programming that was most appropriate for his classification. So right now he goes to a special education private school sponsored by our public school district out here, and he is doing much better now than he ever was. But he definitely needed the most restrictive setting because his issue, in addition to being a year behind academically, was the emotional component. So, but that's when we knew about him. So,
Yeah, great. Thank you so much, Noelle. That was, you have been you were that person for me that taught me the importance of knowing the knowing the rules, knowing the laws, advocating for your child, and
hmm
being their number one support. Because there's
absolutely,
so many broken issues within multiple school districts, and we have to be on top of it. So I appreciate your story.
absolutely.
Okay.
Gabby is 8 years old now. When she was a little bit after she turned 2, I was that mom that read the books that was like, okay, they're supposed to walk around this time. They're supposed to eat food around this time. They're supposed to start babbling around this time. And I noticed she wouldn't. She wasn't babbling. She wasn't trying to sort of communicate. But then a lot of people will tell you, oh, that's just her disposition. She's just quiet. She's like her dad. She's not like a chatty catty like you. So maybe when she feels like having something to say, she'll say it. But I felt something was just not right. And when she was at Bright Horizon here in Elmsford, I had early intervention give her an evaluation. They spent about maybe a half hour with her, and they said she's fine. Nothing's wrong with her. She's give it some time. She'll find her words, whatever. And I knew that that just wasn't right. I never said something was wrong with her cognitively. She just wasn't speaking. She had 2 daycare workers that worked in her room, and their names was like Mary and Jamie, but she would never say Jamie's name, and she would just call Mary Mo. And I was like, after 2, I was like, there's no way that's normal. That's okay. So I decided to start working with her. Like I would just be home, I would let her look at my mouth, and I would encourage her to say certain things like Mickey Mouse because that's what she liked, and just started, gently working with her. And then 6 months later, I had her reevaluated, and thank God I chose a very good evaluation agency, and they came and they went. I mean, they took great time and care in just evaluating her. And it took a minute, but then they were like, yeah, definitely she needs speech therapy. And it was the most like your whole heart and your whole being was like, finally, I know I'm not, you know, crazy. I know what I was seeing. Like, you get that validation finally that, okay, it's not just my mom thing. You know what I mean? Because people make you be like, oh, you're just being extra as a mom. But it was just like, yes, right? And I knew that if I didn't take this step, it would change her personality and who she was, because she started shutting down. She started not even trying. You know what I mean? Like, her dad would come home and she'd be like, you know, how was your day? And she'll be like, oh, mom, you tell him he doesn't understand me. You know what I mean? So she was cognizant herself, or becoming that way, that she wasn't being understood. And so I was like, no, we got to make sure we do something. So they gave her speech. And after a little while, they gave her OT as well, because her fine motor skills. But the child I have now is vastly different. Like, she found her voice. She won't stop talking, but that's a whole different thing. But and Sam will tell you, when she's ready to say something, she's very straight and to the point. But, you know, I'm so grateful that I advocated, and that I didn't just, you know, let it go, that, you know, she'll find it, her words will come, whatever. Because, I mean, it was so crucial and essential for her to progress and to be her best self. But also, we found that when she was in the first grade, we started just seeing some sort of like just inconsistencies with her being in the classroom. Like, certain things she wasn't processing, certain things, or it was difficult for her to follow along 1, 2, 3 instructions. So then I got her evaluated for auditory processing, which they don't accept the diagnosis until they're 8. And so we went to Mercy College. They did a phenomenal job, and they were like, yeah, she has it, you know. And so now we changed the way that she like sits in school, how she takes her tests, how they give her instructions. So there was that component to her IEP as well. But so far, she's doing well.
That's awesome, Otillia. I appreciate your story. And yes, I'm like, if you did not tell me, I would not have known that Gabby was receiving speech therapy. So that is like just such a great example of, you know, why it's important to catch it early and to, you know, and to get the therapy, because it works. I would not have known until you told me. Yeah. Jainnie, can you tell us a little bit about Noah?
Yeah, sure. So Noah, you know, I love hearing both your stories, Noelle and Otillia, and it's been very encouraging. So I would have loved to say that I was, you know, more in tune with all of that stuff. I was not. I was not very welcoming of any kind of delays or whatever with Noah. I was a first time mom, right? Dealing with like all these other things. We had just moved and whatever. There was a whole lot of things going on when he was born. And as he kept progressing, he hit milestones, but it wasn't as like, you know, 6 months you do this. It was sort of like maybe a 1 or 2 month delay, which wasn't really huge at that time. But then as he got older, we started noticing a little bit more. And my husband was more inclined to say, okay, we need to get these things checked out. And as an educator, I was like, hey, you know what? Kids learn at different paces. When Noah was young, he was reading already at the age of 2, right? And he was doing all these math calculations and whatever. So it never really dawned on me that maybe there are other things that were into play. But but there was obviously a delay. At 2, even though he was reading and, you know, decoding words and all that stuff, his communication and his dialogue was not there. So we had him get checked out with, you know, speech, special ed, OT, and all that. He did qualify for speech, so he got that as an early intervention child. And we were able to do that probably for about like 6 months. And then we transferred, then we moved to Queens. And, you know, from Long Island to Queens, all the processes are different, right? And sometimes they don't always transfer as smoothly. And we got him into pre-K, and in pre-K, as part of the New York City Department of Ed, in November, they do a screening, and they do that for every child. And so they kind of raised a concern with us, and they said, we think that he should get evaluated again. And we said, okay, well, he did have speech before. We didn't continue with those services because we didn't know where we were going to be at that point. And we got him evaluated, and they said, he does exhibit, he will need speech, he will need OT because of his, lack of fine motor skills. And as far as the special ed, he needs more support and his attending. So he doesn't have a classification of ADHD or ADD, but he did have a hard time attending and sitting down. So they said, okay, let's have him be placed in a more restrictive environment. So at that point it was 18 students, and then they moved him and said, okay, let's try 12 to 1. And so that's where he was. And again, as a mom, I have to admit that I wasn't as embracing. A lot of thoughts went through my head, like, oh my gosh, what did I do wrong? What did we not do? What kind of support did we not offer him? And also coming from a culture where you don't talk about developmental disabilities, right? That's not a thing. And so we really had hard conversations. Like, my husband and I had hard conversations. My parents and I had hard conversations. His parents had hard conversations with us. And so it was just really hard to, kind of wrap our brains around that. And then also, there were some people who would say, well, try these things out. It'll treat autism, or try this method out. It will, it'll do all these other things. And so I just had to stop and just be honest with what I was feeling throughout the whole process. But anyway, so fast forward, he was actually part of he was part of a more restrictive environment, like I mentioned, for pre-K. And then when we moved him over to kindergarten, we had a choice to send him to a community school, like a local district school, or to move him to a D75 school, which is more specialized special ed program for students in the New York City Department of Education. And I really struggled with that because I asked a lot of people, what are your thoughts? And some of them are like, don't put him there, he's gonna get stuck in the system, or you should. And it was just a lot of different things. But at the end of the day, we decided, what is best for Noah? That's what we really needed for him, and that's what we wanted for him. And regardless of the stigmas, regardless of whatever it is that people have thought or would be thinking, we said, no, let's send him to a D75 school. I was able to visit the school. I fell in love with the school, and I said, that's where he needs to go. And so for the past 2 years, he was there, and he progressed. The teachers were amazing. They saw his skills and his strengths and built on that. And obviously we had really good communication. And so, he was there. For those who are not familiar, D75 is mostly, it's not per grade per se. It's mostly a two grade level combination. And so he was there, for 2 years, and then he was going to be there for another 2 years. But what ended up happening was, they do like a triennial meeting, and they evaluate him, and they do like a psychoeducational evaluation to see where he's at cognitively, emotionally, and all that. And they actually said that he reached the point where he can be put in a standardized environment. So, of course, that's not to us, that's to his credit. He is like a sponge when it comes down to these things, right? And so we never thought that it would be this soon that he could, go back to a community school, but we're grateful for it. Obviously it poses more, it poses a different set of questions, a different set of issues, all that stuff. But one thing that I've learned throughout the process is, like, you need to advocate. I mean, this is why I love both of your stories. You need to advocate for your children. You need to have the support that you need, right? So it's the teachers, your own family, and then your kids are in your space, if not 24 hours, but like in all that. And so what's best for your kid. And so anyway, so that's sort of like our process and where we're at right now. And he's going to district school right now, but it's still a 12-1-1, but it is a standardized assessment. So still there, still working through issues, but it's been good. It's been encouraging being that process.
Nice. Yeah. Thank you so much, Janie. If it wasn't for you, I would not have known about early intervention. I didn't know that kids under 3 were eligible for services until you shared your story about Noah, in our private conversations beforehand. And it was like the tool that we needed to help Olivia. So I've learned so much from you guys, and this is great. Um, yeah, thank you guys for sharing your stories. And I can relate to all of them in my own way. And I think similarly, like Janie said, it was not a relief to me. It was not something that I embraced. Nathan, when he was about 3 years old, I think when he was about 3, that's when we began to notice that he just was not speaking like a normal 3-year-old should. And it's a hard balance because on one hand, people always say, don't compare your kid to other kids, right? I know, but at the other hand, there is a certain kind of like milestone that they should be hitting that you have to consider. And a lot of people were telling me it's because, at that point I was a stay-at-home mom. And they're like, oh, it's because he's home all day with just you and the baby. He needs to go to school. That will help. So we put him in school and we had him interview. It was a private school, so he had to interview with the principal. And then he met his teacher. And within the first week of school, they both said, he needs speech therapy. Like, school alone is not enough, and you need to have him evaluated. So we went through that process, and that's when he qualified for speech therapy, and then he also qualified for, at the time, which they call it a SEIT. It's like a special education teacher that comes in a few times a week and then helps to work on certain things. For him, he's always had an attention difficulty. He's not the kid that's like running around the class, bouncing per se, but he's the kid that kind of like will sit there and zone out, and you don't even know that he's not paying attention. But I know because I'm his mama. So that's been the case. He's now in first grade. He's still receiving the same services. And I think because of that experience, it helped us to notice a lot sooner when it came to Olivia, who's now my 4-year-old. So when she was close to 2, it helped me begin to pay more attention to those milestones. And her case was a lot more severe. And so learning about early intervention from Janie, we were able to go through that evaluation process. We had great evaluators. She got placed in a great self-contained kind of toddler program. And she went from like speaking like 1 or 2 words to speaking in full sentences in a year. Not even a year, a school year. That's how fast, she grew in the program. And I was like, man, this stuff works. You know? But it was hard because I did have those same feelings of like, what did we not do right? Is it because he wasn't in school? Is it because I was too busy just being pregnant and like too tired? I didn't read enough. I didn't do all these things, and like I battled that guilt for a very long time. With each of my kids, because by the time I noticed Olivia, I was pregnant with number 3.
Right.
So
Yeah. Yeah.
I battled that, and I didn't want to embrace it as well. I also just felt like the move was for me to be a stay-at-home mom and for me to keep the kids with me. So like having to admit that they needed outside help made me feel like I was just not doing, like I wasn't living up to my mom duties, or like the
Mhm.
structure that I provided was wrong. So I can totally relate to that, but there is a sense of relief in knowing, being able to identify what your kids need
Mhm.
and knowing that they're getting the help that they deserve or that they really need. You know.
Wow, what a rich discussion, and we are just getting started. Make sure that you stay tuned for part 2 and 3 of our discussion, Embracing Special Education. Make sure that you subscribe to this YouTube channel, hit the notification button so that you'll be alerted when the videos have posted. Don't forget to follow me on Instagram and Facebook, and we'll see you soon. Bye.